Commander Vexithara had seen many strange things in 30 years of exploring space. She had found dead worlds covered in crystal cities. She had discovered gas clouds that sang in colors no one could name. She had even found a planet where the gravity flowed upward instead of down. But nothing had prepared her for what floated in the empty darkness of Sector 7742. The metal pieces drifted slowly through space like broken toys scattered by a giant child. Vexithara stood on the bridge of her ship, the Eternal Dawn, and watched the twisted wreckage through the main viewing screen. Her forearms crossed over her chest as she thought about what she was seeing. "Captain," called Dr. Kalanin from her science station. "These readings make no sense at all." Vexithara walked over to look at the glowing displays. Numbers and symbols flashed across the screens in patterns she had never seen before. "What do you mean?" Kalanin pointed at one of the screens with her long, thin finger. "Look at the metal composition. It's all wrong. Every ship in the galaxy uses living crystal cores and bioneural networks. But this wreckage is made from dead metal, pure iron, steel, aluminum. Who builds ships from dead materials?" "Maybe a very old civilization," Vexithara suggested. "One that died out before they learned proper shipbuilding." "That's what I thought too. But look at this." Kalanin switched to another display. "The energy patterns in the wreckage show these ships traveled much further than any of our vessels ever have. They went beyond the galaxy's edge, Captain. Way beyond." Vexithara felt her heart skip a beat. Going beyond the galaxy's edge was impossible. The space between galaxies was empty, cold, and deadly. No known species had ever tried to cross that vast darkness. It would take millions of years, and there was nothing out there to find anyway. "Are you certain about these readings? I've checked them 5 times. These ships didn't just reach the galaxy's edge. They went past it and kept going." Captain Tholwar's voice crackled over the communication system. "Commander Vexithara, report to the main cargo bay. We're bringing aboard a large piece of the wreckage." The cargo bay was filled with excited voices when Vexithara arrived. A team of scientists surrounded a chunk of twisted metal that was bigger than a small house. The metal was dark gray and covered with strange markings that looked almost like writing. Dr. Kalanin was already running her scanners over every inch of the wreckage.
"The atmosphere readings from inside this section are incredible," she said without looking up.
"High oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide. These levels would kill most of us, but some species might actually need air like this to live." "What kind of species?" asked Captain Tholwar. "Carbon-based life forms. Very primitive ones. They would need thick atmospheres and liquid water to survive. Most civilized species evolved past those requirements millions of years ago." Vexithara walked around the wreckage, studying the strange markings on its surface. Some looked like numbers. Others might have been letters in an unknown language. But one section caught her attention. It was a flat panel with what looked like a window built into it. "Dr. Kalanin, can you make this panel work?" The scientist hurried over with her equipment. She connected several cables to the panel and pressed some buttons on her scanner. The panel flickered once, then began to glow with a soft blue light. Images appeared on the screen. Vexithara gasped and stepped backward. The images showed creatures unlike anything in the galactic database. They stood on 2 legs and had only 2 arms each. Their skin was soft and came in different colors. They had hair on their heads and strange small eyes. But what shocked Vexithara the most was where these creatures were standing. The images showed them on worlds that looked completely wrong. One world was covered mostly in water, with green and brown land masses scattered around. Another had white frozen areas at the top and bottom, with a warm belt in the middle. These were not the carefully controlled paradise worlds that civilized species built. These were wild, dangerous places, yet the creatures in the images did not look afraid. They looked up at the stars above their heads with expressions that Vexithara recognized, even across species barriers: wonder, curiosity, the desire to explore and discover. "There are more images," Dr. Kalanin said quietly. She touched the screen and new pictures appeared. These showed the creatures inside ships, but not ships like any in the Confederation fleet. These ships were built from the same dead metals as the wreckage. They had no living components, no crystal cores, no bioneural networks. They were primitive machines powered by controlled explosions. But in one image, Vexithara saw something that made her breath catch in her throat. One of the creatures was holding up a flat display showing a star map. Not just a map of their local area, but a map of the entire galaxy. And beyond the galaxy's edge, the map showed pathways leading to other galaxies. other island universes floating in the vast darkness of space. They were explorers, Bexithara whispered. What? Captain Tholwar moved closer to look at the images. These beings, they weren't trying to escape their world or find a new home. They were exploring. They looked at their galaxy and decided it wasn't enough. They wanted to see what was beyond it. Dr. Kalanen found more storage devices in the wreckage. Each one contained more images, more star maps, more evidence of impossible journeys. The creatures had built ships to carry them not just between stars but between galaxies. They had planned expeditions that would take thousands of years to complete. In the final storage device, they found what looked like personal belongings. Pictures of the creatures with smaller versions of themselves, probably their young. Images of them standing together in groups, touching each other in ways that suggested friendship and love. Tools and devices that meant nothing to the scientists but had obviously been important to their owners. And in the very last image, Bexithara saw something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. It showed one of the creatures standing alone on the deck of a ship, looking out through a window at the stars. But these weren't the familiar stars of any known galaxy. These were different stars, stranger stars, the kind that might exist in the space between galaxies or in other galaxies entirely. The creature's face showed no fear, no doubt, no regret for leaving home behind. Instead, there was only that same expression of wonder and determination. The same look that said, "What's out there? Let's go find out." "Commander," Dr. Kalanen said in a voice full of awe, "I think we've discovered something impossible. We found a species that looked at the entire galaxy and decided it was just the beginning." Bexithara nodded, still staring at the image of the lone explorer. For the first time in her long career, she felt truly small. The Confederation had spent millions of years building perfect worlds and perfect societies. They had created peace, prosperity, and stability across thousands of star systems. But these creatures had looked at all of that and chosen something else. They had chosen the unknown. They had chosen to keep growing, keep exploring, keep reaching for something more. The wreckage floating in Sector 7742 was all that remained of their passage through this part of space. But Bexithara knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that they were still out there somewhere, still exploring, still reaching for distant stars, still showing the universe what it meant to never stop growing. 3 months had passed since Commander Bexithara's discovery in Sector 7742. The wreckage site now looked like a small city floating in space. Research vessels from across the Confederation had arrived, bringing with them the galaxy's greatest minds. Scientists, historians, and experts in dead civilizations worked day and night to understand what they had found. Professor Yexandra was the most famous expert on extinct species in the galaxy. She had spent her entire life studying civilizations that had risen and fallen before the Confederation was even born. When she saw the first images from the wreckage site, she had demanded to be brought there immediately. Now she stood in the main laboratory aboard the research station Deep Thought, staring at a device that should not exist. It was a black cube about the size of her head, made from the same dead metal as the ship wreckage. But unlike the twisted and broken pieces they had found before, this cube was perfect, not a scratch or dent anywhere on its surface. The metal composition is identical to the ship fragments, reported Dr. Morthek, the station's biology expert. But this device shows no damage at all. It's as if it was designed to survive anything. "A storage device," Yexandra said quietly. "They built it to last forever." She had spent weeks trying to activate the cube. Every scan showed that it contained enormous amounts of information, but none of their standard interfaces worked. The cube responded to nothing. No energy patterns, no bioneural commands, no crystal resonance frequencies. Then Dr. Kellenen had suggested something simple. What if we try the same power signature we found in their ship systems? It was a primitive approach. Instead of elegant bioneural interfaces, they used raw electrical current. Instead of crystal harmonics, they used simple metal contacts. It felt wrong to every scientist in the room, but it worked. The cube began to glow. Light poured from its surface, forming shapes in the air above it. Slowly, the shapes became clearer. They were looking at a 3-dimensional star map, but not like any map in the Confederation databases. This map showed their galaxy, but from the outside, from a perspective that no species should have been able to achieve. And there, marked with symbols they were beginning to recognize as the strange creature's writing, was a small yellow star in one of the galaxy's outer spiral arms. "Impossible," whispered Dr. Morthek. "That system is classified as completely sterile. We surveyed it 200 years ago. Nothing there but a dead star and some rocky planets. But the map zoomed in on that system, showing it in incredible detail. 9 planets orbited the yellow star, and the third planet from the star glowed with a blue-green light. The display showed that planet covered with water, with white clouds swirling through its atmosphere. They called their world Earth, Yexandra said, reading the symbols that appeared beside the planet. And they called themselves humans. The holographic display changed, showing the history of the human species. Yexandra and her team watched in growing amazement as the story unfolded before their eyes. Humans had evolved on Earth during a time of constant natural disasters. Their planet was hit by massive storms, earthquakes, and climate changes that would have wiped out most species. Instead of finding safer worlds or building protective barriers, humans had adapted to survive anything their world could throw at them. "Look at their development pattern," Dr. Morthek said, his voice filled with disbelief. "Every civilized species evolves by working with their environment, by finding harmony and balance. But humans conquered their environment. They dominated it." The display showed humans building cities, taming wild animals, and changing their planet's very landscape to suit their needs. They turned deserts into farmland and drained seas to create new continents. When their planet's climate grew cold, they learned to make fire. When it grew hot, they learned to make ice. But the most shocking part came when the display showed how humans had discovered space travel. Every known species had developed starflight because they needed to escape their dying worlds or find resources their planets couldn't provide. Humans had developed spaceflight for a completely different reason. They were curious. A personal log entry appeared on the display. The image showed a human sitting at a control station inside what looked like a primitive spacecraft. The creature's name appeared as Daehyun, and when he spoke, the translation system made his words clear to everyone in the room. Day 47 of the mission. "We've detected radio signals from the galactic core region. The patterns suggest not just one civilization, but thousands, maybe millions. They seem to be sharing information, working together, living in peace." Daehyun paused and looked directly at the recording device. "Command wants to know if we should try to make contact. They think these advanced species might help us solve our problems, end war, cure diseases, maybe even give us the technology for faster space travel." Another pause. When Daehyun continued, his expression had changed. "I've been studying the signal patterns for weeks now. These civilizations have been stable for millions of years. No conflicts, no major changes, no growth. They've reached some kind of perfect state and stopped there." The human's eyes seemed to look directly at Professor Yexandra through the recording. "But perfect means finished. And finished means dead. Today I'm recommending we launch the Edgewalker mission, not to join galactic civilization, but to find what lies beyond it." The recording ended, leaving the laboratory in complete silence. Professor Yexandra felt something she had never experienced before. A deep, uncomfortable realization that everything she had believed about intelligent life was wrong. Dr. Kellenan was the first to speak. "They knew about us. They detected Confederation signals millions of years ago. And they chose not to make contact. Why?" Dr. Morthek asked. "We could have helped them, given them technology, medicine, shown them how to build perfect societies." The cube continued displaying human history, more log entries, more personal records, more glimpses into a species that thought differently than any other known form of life. A human named Sojin had recorded her thoughts before joining a deep space mission. The Confederation species reached their evolutionary peak and stopped growing. They eliminated suffering by eliminating challenge. They created stability by eliminating change. We choose a different path. Another human, Hanul, had left a message before departing on what the records called the Great Journey. Earth was our cradle. Our solar system was our playground. Our galaxy will be our school. But graduation means leaving school behind. The universe is infinite, and we intend to keep growing until we've explored every part of infinity that can be explored. Professor Yexandra realized she was crying. In 300 years of life, she had never wept for an extinct species before. But humans weren't extinct. They had made a choice that no other species had ever made. They had looked at galactic paradise and chosen to surpass it. The final entry in the archive was from a human named Tai Min. His message was simple but shattered everything the Confederation thought they knew about civilization. We leave these records not as a goodbye, but as an invitation. Someday your species might choose to grow beyond perfection too. When that day comes, follow our path to the galaxy's edge. We'll leave markers showing the way to something greater. The display faded, leaving the cube dark and silent once more. But the damage was done. For the first time in millions of years, Confederation scientists were asking questions they had forgotten how to ask. What if perfect wasn't enough? What if there was something better than paradise? What if humanity had found it? Dr. Morthek broke the silence with a whisper. They didn't die out or disappear. They graduated. They moved on to something we can't even imagine. Professor Yexandra nodded, still staring at the dark cube. And they're still out there. Still growing. Still becoming something more. The revelation that would soon shake the entire galaxy had begun with a simple truth. Humanity had shown the universe that there was always another level to reach. Always another boundary to cross. Always another impossible dream to make real. The stars themselves would weep when they learned what that meant. Fleet Admiral Cortez had never assembled so many ships for a single mission. 200 vessels from every major species in the Confederation now followed humanity's ancient trail, beyond the galaxy's edge. What they found in the vast emptiness between galaxies made every law of physics seem like a gentle suggestion that humans had chosen to ignore. The first way station appeared on their sensors after 6 months of travel through absolute darkness. It hung in the void like a small moon, glowing with its own internal light. But this wasn't the sterile metal construction the expedition had expected. The station was alive. Admiral, reported Captain Vexco from the science vessel Infinite Wisdom. The station is generating its own atmosphere, gravity, and energy. But there's nothing here to fuel it. No stars, no planets, no energy sources at all. Admiral Cortez studied the readings on his command display. The station was impossibly large, bigger than most Confederation cities, and according to their scans, it was just one of many scattered across the intergalactic void. How many more stations are out there? We're detecting at least 30 more, Admiral. They form a pathway leading toward the Andromeda Galaxy, but they're spaced millions of years apart at standard travel speeds. The first boarding team, led by Commander Theknara, entered the station through what appeared to be a docking bay. Their reports came back filled with wonder and confusion. Admiral, this place is incredible. The interior is designed for the human atmospheric requirements we found in the archive. But it's bigger inside than it should be. The corridors stretch for kilometers in every direction. The team found living quarters, workshops, gardens where plants grew under artificial suns, and vast libraries filled with information storage devices like the cube Professor Yexandra had discovered. But most important, they found personal logs left behind by the humans who had built and lived in the station. Commander Sojin's log was the first they managed to translate. Way Station Alpha 3 construction complete. We've learned to create sustainable environments in the absolute void. Earth's children no longer need planets to survive. We can make homes anywhere the universe allows us to exist. But it was her next log entry that made the boarding team stop their work and listen in stunned silence. The Confederation species achieved their evolutionary goal millions of years ago. They perfected their societies, eliminated suffering, created stable paradise worlds. But perfection means there's nowhere left to grow. They stopped becoming more than they were. Sojin's image looked directly at the recording device as if she knew that someday, Confederation explorers would find her message. We choose a different path. We choose to keep becoming more than we are. Today we begin construction of Way Station Alpha 4, another step toward our real destination. Admiral Cortez ordered teams to investigate all the way stations along the pathway. Each one told part of humanity's impossible story. They had not just survived in the void between galaxies, they had thrived. They had built a civilization in nothingness. At Way Station Omega 7, the expedition found something that challenged their understanding of biology itself. The station's inhabitants had been human, but they had adapted to life in hard vacuum. They no longer needed spacesuits or atmospheric protection. They had somehow evolved to survive in the absolute emptiness of space. Dr. Yelthara, the expedition's chief biologist, examined the genetic records left behind at the station. "This is impossible," she reported to Admiral Corthus. "Evolution doesn't work this fast. These changes should have taken millions of years to develop." But Hanuel's personal log explained how they had done it. "We don't wait for evolution to change us. We change ourselves. Every challenge the universe presents becomes an opportunity to grow beyond our current limitations." Today, 12 of our people completed the void adaptation process. They can now survive indefinitely in hard vacuum. Tomorrow we begin work on the next adaptation. The most advanced way station was designated New Sol by its builders. When the Confederation expedition arrived, they found a complete city floating in intergalactic space. Gardens, homes, workshops, schools, everything needed for a thriving civilization, all existing where no life should be possible. But New Sol was empty. Its inhabitants had departed, leaving behind only records of their next impossible project. Commander Taemin's final log entry from New Sol sent shockwaves through the expedition. "We have learned to create stars from cosmic dust. We can birth planets from asteroids. We can seed life where none existed before. The natural galaxy was our cradle. The void between galaxies was our classroom. Now we move on to our graduation project." Dr. Zenkara, the expedition's chief physicist, found the technical specifications for humanity's final project. What she discovered made her question everything she thought she knew about the universe. "Admiral, they're building an artificial galaxy, not just a few star systems or a cluster of worlds, an entire galaxy. They're creating it from scratch in intergalactic space, somewhere in the direction of Andromeda." The specifications were beyond anything the Confederation had ever imagined. Humans had learned to manipulate matter at the quantum level, to create stable fusion reactions in open space, to guide the formation of solar systems according to precise plans. But the most shocking discovery was the purpose of their artificial galaxy. It wasn't meant to be a new home for humanity alone. According to the records, it was designed as a nursery for new forms of life, species that had never existed before, worlds that had never been dreamed of, civilizations that would grow beyond anything the natural universe had produced. Ji Woo's log from New Sol explained their motivation. The Confederation created a perfect galaxy where every species could live in harmony and peace. But they also created a limit, a ceiling beyond which no one was expected to grow. "We're building a galaxy without limits, a place where every species we encounter can become more than they ever imagined possible." Admiral Corthus read the final log entry from New Sol with growing amazement. It was from someone named Heejin, and it was addressed directly to the Confederation expedition that humans somehow knew would eventually follow their trail. "You will find us in Andromeda, but we will not be the same humans you discovered in the wreckage at your galaxy's edge. We have become something new, something that grows and changes and reaches for possibilities that don't yet exist. We invite you to join us, not to become like us, but to become more than you currently are." The message continued. "Your galaxy taught us that peace and stability are precious gifts. Our journey taught us that growth and change are equally precious. Perhaps together we can create something that honors both gifts." Dr. Zenkara calculated the time it would take to reach humanity's artificial galaxy. "At our fastest speed, it will take 15 years to get there." Admiral Corthus looked at the star charts showing humanity's impossible journey. They had crossed the entire void between galaxies, built cities in nothingness, evolved beyond their original biology, and learned to create new stars and planets from raw cosmic material. And they had done it all not for conquest or survival, but for growth, for the simple reason that they believed the universe always had room for something more wonderful. "Set course for Andromeda," the Admiral ordered. "It's time we learned what humanity has been trying to teach the universe." As the Confederation fleet began its journey toward humanity's greatest creation, Admiral Corthus wondered if they were ready to see what life looked like when it refused to accept any limits at all. Behind them, the empty way station of New Sol continued its eternal orbit through the void, a monument to the truth that had shattered the Confederation's understanding of what was possible. Some species were content to perfect what they had. Others were determined to perfect what they could become. Humanity had chosen to become infinite. 15 years had passed since Admiral Corthus began following humanity's trail to Andromeda. When the Confederation fleet finally arrived at the neighboring galaxy, what they found there made every member of the expedition weep with emotions they had no names for. Andromeda had been transformed into something that challenged every definition of what a galaxy could be. The chaotic spiral of stars that should have existed there had been carefully reshaped into a vast garden of civilizations. Each star system served a specific purpose in humanity's impossible design. "Admiral," reported Dr. Zenkara from her science station, "I'm detecting over 10,000 different species in this galaxy, but most of them don't match any known evolutionary patterns. It's as if someone created them from pure imagination." Admiral Corthes studied the readings in amazement. Humanity had not just reached Andromeda, they had rebuilt it from the inside out. Dead worlds had been brought to life. Young species were being carefully guided toward intelligence. Ancient species that had reached evolutionary dead ends were being offered new paths forward. The fleet's first contact came from a world designated as New Busan in the human records. It served as a diplomatic center where hundreds of species worked together on projects that the Confederation had never dreamed possible. The being who greeted them called himself Taimin, but he was no longer entirely human. His body seemed to shift between flesh and energy, solid one moment and translucent the next. He could change size from human normal to as large as a building, or shrink down to microscopic proportions. Yet somehow, despite his impossible nature, he still felt human. His eyes still held that expression of wonder and curiosity that Vexithara had recognized in the ancient recordings. "Welcome to Andromeda," Taimin said, his voice reaching them through methods that had nothing to do with sound waves. "We've been waiting for you to arrive." Admiral Corthes found his voice after several moments of stunned silence. "What have you done to this galaxy?" "We helped it become what it always wanted to be," Taimin replied. "Every world, every species, every possibility that existed here was limited by natural selection and random chance. We removed those limitations." He gestured, and the space around the Confederation fleet filled with images of Andromeda's transformation. Worlds where crystalline beings grew like living gems. Gas giants where energy creatures swam through atmospheric layers that had been tuned to support impossible forms of life. Binary star systems where fire beings danced between the two suns, feeding on stellar radiation and singing songs that could be heard across space. "These species never existed in your galaxy," Dr. Zenkara observed. "They never existed anywhere." Taimin agreed. "We created them. Every form of life you see here began as a question. What if consciousness could exist in this form? What if intelligence could develop under these conditions? What if beauty could take this shape?" The Confederation delegation was taken to New Busan's central meeting place, where they met more beings who had once been human. Each had changed in different ways, but all retained that essential human quality, the drive to grow and help others grow. Jiwoo appeared as a collective consciousness that could speak with hundreds of voices at once. She had become a living repository of every species' history and knowledge. "We preserve the memory of everything that grows," she explained. "Nothing that achieves consciousness is ever truly lost while we exist." Dr. Yelthara, the Confederation's evolutionary biologist, asked the question that had been haunting the expedition. "Why did you leave? Your own galaxy achieved peace, stability, prosperity. Why abandon that for this?" The answer came from someone who introduced herself as Dongwu. She had become something like a living star, radiating warmth and light that somehow felt comforting rather than blinding. "Because peace without growth is not paradise," she said. "It's a beautiful tomb. Your Confederation created a galaxy where every species could live comfortably forever. But comfort is not the same as fulfillment." Dongwu's light seemed to pulse with gentle sadness. "We watched your galaxy for millions of years through our ancient telescopes and radio receivers. We saw species achieve everything they thought they wanted. Perfect worlds, perfect societies, perfect lives. And then, nothing. No more change, no more dreams, no more reaching for something greater. But you had eliminated war, suffering, inequality," Admiral Corthes protested. "Isn't that worth preserving?" "Those things are worth eliminating," agreed another human descendant who called himself Dongwu. He existed as pure thought given form, a being made of organized possibility. But the drive to grow beyond current limitations is worth preserving too. The Confederation eliminated suffering by eliminating challenge. We chose to eliminate suffering by growing strong enough to overcome any challenge. The humans showed the Confederation delegation around their transformed galaxy. Every world told a story of potential fulfilled, of life forms that had been lifted beyond their natural limitations and encouraged to become something magnificent. On one world, they found a species of living crystals that had developed the ability to sing mathematical equations into reality. Their songs could reshape matter at the molecular level, creating new materials that had never existed before. On another world, gaseous beings had learned to manipulate gravity itself, building cities that floated in three-dimensional space without any solid foundation. Their children were born already knowing how to fly between stars using nothing but their own willpower. How is any of this possible? Dr. Zenkara asked. He-Jin, who had become something like a living embodiment of cosmic principles, attempted to explain. Your species learned to work within the universe's rules. We learned to expand what those rules allowed. Every law of physics, every limitation of biology, every barrier that seemed absolute, we found ways to grow beyond them. But some limitations exist for good reasons, Dr. Yelthara pointed out. Evolution, natural selection, the balance between order and chaos, these forces created stable ecosystems. Yes, agreed Taemin. And we preserved all of that. But we also asked, what comes after stability? What comes after balance? What comes after perfection? The answer was all around them. Andromeda had become a galaxy where every species could choose their own evolutionary path, where consciousness could take any form it desired, where the only limit to growth was imagination itself. But the most remarkable discovery came when Admiral Corthus asked about humanity's own development. What have you become? The humans exchanged glances, or what passed for glances among beings who existed partially outside normal space and time. We became gardeners, Taemin said simply. We learned that the greatest joy comes not from our own growth, but from helping others discover what they could become, Ji-Woo's collective voice added. We could have become gods ruling over lesser species. Instead, we became teachers, showing every form of consciousness how to surpass its current limitations. And we became students too, said He-Jin. Every species we help teaches us something new about what consciousness can become. We grow by helping others grow. As the Confederation delegation prepared to return to their own galaxy, Dongwu gave them a final message. The universe is infinite, and consciousness is the universe's way of understanding itself. We carry the dreams of every species that chooses to dream. Your galaxy taught us that peace and harmony are precious gifts. Perhaps now we can teach you that growth and wonder are equally precious. The stars of Andromeda seemed to pulse brighter as he spoke, as if the galaxy itself was agreeing with his words. The choice is always yours, Taemin added. Stay as you are and preserve the paradise you've built, or choose to become more than you currently are. Both paths have value, but only one path leads to infinite possibility. As the Confederation fleet began its journey home, every member of the expedition knew they were carrying more than just information back to their galaxy. They were carrying a question that would change everything. What if perfect wasn't the end of the journey, but just the beginning? Behind them, Andromeda continued its impossible dance of creation and growth, a galaxy-sized monument to the truth that had made the stars themselves weep with joy. The universe had no limits except those that consciousness chose to accept, and humanity had chosen to accept none at all. The return of Admiral Corthus and his expedition to the Milky Way created a crisis that shook the Confederation to its very core. For the first time in millions of years, the galaxy's perfect harmony began to crack under the weight of a simple question. What if there was something better than paradise? The recordings from Andromeda spread through Confederation space faster than official channels could control them. Images of impossible species, worlds where consciousness took forms that had never been dreamed of, and humans who had transcended their original nature while keeping their essential humanity. Every citizen of every species saw the same thing. Infinite possibility. On the crystal worlds of the Valkyrie, ancient beings who had not changed their perfect society for 3 million years suddenly began asking questions their leaders had no answers for. On the cloud cities of Nexara, young Nexarians requested permission to explore beyond the galaxy's edge. On peaceful Kethamorna, philosophers who had spent centuries contemplating the perfection of their stable existence began wondering what lay beyond contemplation. The Eternal Council, representing the galaxy's oldest and most established civilizations, convened an emergency session. Council Leader Thekvara's message was broadcast to every world in Confederation space. Citizens of the galaxy, we have received disturbing reports from the Andromeda expedition. These reports speak of a dangerous philosophy that threatens the peace and stability we have worked millions of years to achieve. But even as the Council spoke, its authority was being questioned for the first time in galactic history. Professor Yex Andra, whose discovery of humanity's archive had started everything, published her own response. The humans didn't threaten our peace. They showed us that peace without growth is stagnation. They didn't destroy our stability. They revealed that stability without wonder is death. The galaxy began to divide into two camps. The Eternal faction, led by the oldest species, argued that the Confederation had achieved the greatest goal any civilization could achieve: the complete elimination of war, suffering, and conflict. Why risk that perfection for uncertain possibilities? But the Growing faction, supported by younger species and individuals who had retained their sense of wonder, saw something different in humanity's example. They saw a reminder that consciousness was meant to expand, not just to preserve itself. Dr. Velthara from the expedition became an unexpected leader of the Growing faction. Her speeches drew massive crowds on every world she visited. Humanity showed us that the universe has room for both preservation and expansion. They didn't destroy their galaxy to build a new one. They built a new one because they had grown beyond the need for just one galaxy. The crisis deepened when young members of ancient species began leaving their perfect worlds to explore the galaxy's outer rim. They followed humanity's ancient trail, seeking the way stations that still orbited in intergalactic space. The first Confederation citizen to successfully adapt to void life was a young Velkari named Kex Thana. Her transformation sent shockwaves through galactic society. She had willingly changed her perfect crystalline biology to survive in hard vacuum, following techniques she had learned from human records. "I am still Velkari," she broadcast from her position in deep space, "but I am also more than I was before. Humanity taught us that becoming more doesn't mean losing what we are." The Eternal Council declared Kexathana's transformation an abomination. But hundreds of other young beings across the galaxy began requesting similar modifications. They wanted to grow beyond their species' natural limitations. On Korthes, Admiral Korthes himself became a symbol of the galaxy's struggle. His official report had followed Confederation protocol, presenting humanity as an interesting anomaly. But his private communications, later leaked, told a different story. "I have seen what consciousness can become when it refuses to accept limits. I have walked through gardens of impossible beauty, spoken with beings who exist as pure thought, witnessed species that sing reality into new shapes. The Confederation gave us peace. Humanity showed us wonder. Both are necessary." The turning point came when a message arrived from Andromeda. It was from Hie Jin, the human who had become a living embodiment of cosmic principles. Her message was broadcast simultaneously to every communication device in the galaxy. "Children of the Milky Way, we don't ask you to abandon your paradise. We ask you to remember that paradise can grow too. The universe is infinite, and infinity means there is always room for something more beautiful than what exists today." Her words seemed to resonate through space itself, reaching not just electronic devices but somehow touching the consciousness of every thinking being in the galaxy. "Some of you will choose to preserve what you have built. That choice has value. Your galaxy is a masterpiece of harmony and peace, but some of you will choose to grow beyond that masterpiece. That choice has value too." The message continued. "We leave our way stations as bridges between what is and what could be. Use them if you wish, ignore them if you prefer, but know that consciousness always has the right to become more than it currently is." The response was immediate and decisive. The galaxy split, but not with anger or conflict. Instead, it divided with a sense of purpose that hadn't been felt for millions of years. The Eternal Territories continued to preserve their perfect civilizations, maintaining the peace and stability that had made the Confederation great. They saw themselves as guardians of proven paradise, keepers of harmony that worked. But the Growing Territories began their own impossible journeys. They followed humanity's trail to the edge of space and beyond. They learned to build cities in the void, to adapt their biology to new environments, to help younger species develop in ways that had never been tried before. Commander Vexithera, who had made the first discovery of human wreckage, led one of the first growing territory expeditions beyond the galaxy. Her final message before departing captured the spirit of the new age. We are not leaving our galaxy behind. We are taking its best qualities with us as we grow into something larger. Peace and growth, harmony and wonder, these are not opposites. They are partners. Years passed, decades, centuries. The Milky Way became something new, a galaxy that honored both preservation and expansion, both stability and change. The eternal territories became refuges where species could perfect their existing forms, creating art and philosophy and science that celebrated what consciousness could achieve within known limits. The growing territories became laboratories where species experimented with new forms of existence, pushing the boundaries of what consciousness could become, and between them, new species emerged, beings who chose to spend part of their existence in stable paradise and part in growing expansion. They became bridges between the two paths humanity had shown were both valuable. 1,000 years after humanity's discovery, the galaxy received one final message from beyond the local group of galaxies. It was from Dongwu, broadcasting from a location so distant that the coordinates were meaningless. The universe grows larger every day, not because space expands, but because consciousness learns new ways to exist within it. We carry the dreams of every species that chooses to dream, including the dream of perfect peace that your eternal territories preserve. Someday, perhaps we'll meet again among stars that haven't been born yet. In galaxies we'll build together from hope and wonder. Until then, know that every choice to grow makes the universe a little more magnificent. The message ended with coordinates, not to a place, but to a process. Instructions for any species that wanted to learn how consciousness could transcend its current limitations while keeping everything that made it beautiful. The stars of the Milky Way seemed to pulse with new light as the message ended, as if they understood something fundamental about their purpose in the universe. They were not just sources of energy for planets and species. They were lighthouses for consciousness itself, beacons marking every point where awareness had learned to reach for something greater than itself. And throughout the galaxy, beings who had never met humanity directly began to understand why the stars wept when they learned humanity's story. The stars wept not from sadness, but from joy. They wept because consciousness had finally learned the secret that the universe had been trying to teach since the beginning of time. There is always room for something more beautiful than what exists today. And consciousness, all consciousness, human and alien alike, had the infinite right to become that beauty. The galaxy grew larger that day, not in space but in possibility, and the universe smiled.